Alex, Maya, and Liam thought this school trip would be the adventure of a lifetime. But the moment they stepped off the bus into the forest, the trees seemed to watch, and something unseen began to follow them. What started as a simple trip quickly turned into a nightmare they couldn't escape, and the forest had its own rules. By the time the sun set, none of them would ever be the same. The bus ride felt longer than it should have. I stared out the window, watching the city shrink into tiny squares of gray and the streets twist into winding roads that disappeared into dense forest. My classmates laughed and shoved each other around, their voices bouncing off the walls of the bus, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling under my skin. The air smelled different here, thick and damp, carrying hints of wet earth and something sharp, almost metallic. It made me wrinkle my nose, but I couldn't look away from the forest that seemed to stretch endlessly, dark and alive. When we finally arrived, the campsite felt smaller than I expected. The cabins were old, their wooden walls warped and gray, leaning slightly to one side as if tired from standing too long. The guide gave a short speech, warning us to stick together and follow the paths, but I couldn't help noticing how quickly his eyes darted into the forest while he spoke. My gut told me there was more to this place than the cheerful map he handed out. I tried to focus on my luggage, unpacking my things, but the trees surrounding the campsite whispered with the wind, and each creak and rustle made my pulse spike. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling of the cabin. The room smelled of old wood and dust, and the dim moonlight made the shadows stretch across the floor like long fingers. I told myself the noises were normal, the wind, branches scraping against the walls, but when I heard scratching at the window, my chest tightened. It started slow, almost hesitant, and then it came again, deliberate and heavier, as though someone, or something, was trying to get in. I froze, my fingers gripping the blanket. I told myself it was just a branch, something simple and explainable, but the sound was too measured, too precise. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow moving past the window, quick then gone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst, and for a long moment I couldn't breathe. I leaned closer to see, my eyes wide in the faint light. There was no figure, no person, nothing tangible, just the empty glass. But the feeling lingered, a cold presence hovering outside, watching. I pulled the blanket around myself and tried to convince my mind to calm down, to sleep. But when I finally closed my eyes, I could still hear the scratches, slow and deliberate, moving around the cabin now, circling as if it knew I was awake. And when I dared to peek out the window one last time, I saw it. A face pressed against the glass, pale and wet, with hollow eyes staring straight at me. My scream caught in my throat, and then it disappeared, leaving only the memory of those eyes, burning into my mind long after I tried to close my eyes and convince myself it was gone. The morning light brought no relief. The forest outside the cabin felt heavier, almost oppressive, as if it had waited all night for me to wake. My classmates were awake and laughing, but I couldn't shake the memory of the face pressed against my window. I avoided them, slipping out quietly, my shoes crunching on the dirt path, following a trail that wound deeper into the woods. Every step felt unnatural, like the forest was guiding me somewhere I wasn't meant to go. The trees leaned closer as I passed, their branches scratching together above me in whispers I couldn't understand. I found a hidden path, overgrown and covered in moss, one that wasn't on any map we had been given. It seemed abandoned, untouched for years. Curiosity pulled me forward, though my chest tightened with every step. The path twisted and turned, the sunlight barely reaching the ground, and the shadows seemed to stretch and move with a mind of their own. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier with each step. At the end of the path, I stumbled upon an old cabin, completely isolated. Its wood was rotting, and the windows were broken, letting in strange, cold drafts. The smell hit me first, a mixture of mildew, decay, and something that made my stomach churn. I hesitated at the doorway, but something inside me demanded I look, as if the forest had led me here for a reason I didn't yet understand. Inside, the cabin was frozen in time. Dust covered every surface, thick enough that footprints could have been preserved for decades. Torn papers littered the floor, some with strange symbols, some with sketches of people with hollow eyes and gaping mouths, screaming silently. I froze when I realized one of the sketches looked familiar. My teacher's face, drawn with exaggerated fear as if the person in the sketch had felt something I couldn't comprehend. A sudden sound made me jump, a floorboard creaking from somewhere behind me. My heart leapt into my throat and I spun around. Nothing. Only the dust motes dancing in the sunlight streaming through the broken windows. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was the old wood settling, but the air had grown icy, unnatural, though the sun was still high outside. Then I noticed it. On the wall near the corner, there was a handprint. Not faded, not old, fresh. Dark and sticky, smeared across the wood. My skin crawled. The print was human, but wrong, too thin, too elongated, as if the fingers didn't belong to any living person I had ever seen. And I could swear for a split second that it twitched, the tips of the fingers flexing as if trying to reach for me. I stumbled backward, hitting the table behind me, and my heart pounded so hard it drowned out all other sound. I bolted out of the cabin, running blindly down the hidden path. The forest seemed alive, the shadows twisting as I moved. Behind me, I thought I heard whispers, soft, urgent, echoing through the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the familiar path back to the campsite. My chest heaved and sweat dripped from my forehead, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. When I finally dared to look back toward the cabin, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the window, staring at me, smiling, waiting. By the third night, the unease had grown unbearable. The forest outside the cabins seemed alive, whispering and shifting around me, and the memories of that hidden cabin haunted my thoughts. My classmates were acting strangely too, quiet, distracted, their laughter forced and hollow. I tried to convince myself it was all nerves, that I was imagining the shadows. But then the disappearances began. It started small. One student didn't return from a walk in the woods. The guide said he probably got lost and would show up soon, but the worry in his eyes told me otherwise. We searched, calling out names that were swallowed by the trees, but all we found were footprints leading deeper into the forest. And then nothing. The ground seemed to swallow them, erasing any trace. That night, another student's bed was empty. At first, I thought it was a prank, but the sense of dread crawling over me told me it wasn't. I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the shadows in the corners of the cabin, listening to sounds that didn't belong. Branches tapped on the windows, low whispers curled through the air, and the wind seemed to carry voices, familiar, faint, calling my name. I told myself it was fear, that my imagination was turning the forest into a predator, but then I heard it clearly. Footsteps inside the cabin. Heavy, slow, deliberate, circling the room. My blanket couldn't shield me. I had to see what it was. I crept toward the door, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run. The hallway was dark, the moonlight weak against the shadows. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, perfectly still. Its face was obscured by darkness, but the shape was human, too thin, too tall. I blinked and it vanished, leaving only the silence and the chill that crawled over my skin. Driven by a mixture of fear and desperation, I ran back toward the hidden cabin, thinking maybe the shelter inside would offer some explanation, some sense of reality. But when I arrived, the door slammed shut behind me before I could enter. I was trapped. The room smelled worse than before, like damp soil mixed with rot. The sketches on the walls had changed. The faces no longer stared silently. They moved. Their mouths opened, stretching impossibly wide, screaming in silence, and their eyes followed me wherever I turned. Then I saw it, at the window, pressed against the glass. The same pale, wet face I had seen the first night, its hollow eyes boring into mine. Only now it wasn't alone. Shadows twisted around it, forming shapes that I couldn't name. The face smiled, a slow, knowing grin that froze my blood. My mind screamed for me to escape, but the door wouldn't budge. The whispering voices rose to a frantic chorus, circling me, calling my name, laughing softly in a way that made the walls feel alive. I backed into a corner, unable to breathe, as the figure tapped on the glass slowly at first, then harder, until the sound echoed in my skull. And then I noticed it. Tiny fingers pressed against the inside of the window, the same pale thin shape as the handprint in the old cabin. They twitched, flexing toward me, and I realized with terror that whatever was out there had learned to reach through the world in ways I couldn't understand. By the fourth day, the campsite no longer felt familiar. The trees loomed closer, their branches twisting in ways that seemed almost deliberate, and the shadows clung to the cabins like dark stains. The guide's voice had changed. He moved stiffly, almost mechanically, and his warnings felt rehearsed, lacking the warmth or authority of before. I could not shake the feeling that he was afraid of something he wasn't telling us. My classmates were quieter, too. Fear had settled over the group like a fog, heavy and suffocating, and every creak of the cabins or rustle of leaves made my stomach knot. The missing students were never mentioned directly, only whispers that were quickly hushed. I could feel them everywhere, their presence like a weight pressing against my chest, their eyes watching from the corners of the forest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, pale, hollow-eyed, staring, frozen in silent terror. I tried to avoid thinking about it, tried to ignore the shadows that moved unnaturally along the paths, but curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know where they were, what had taken them. That night, unable to sleep, I slipped out again. The forest welcomed me, its sounds amplified in the darkness, branches scratching together like fingernails on skin, the wind whispering names soft and urgent. I stumbled across the hidden path I had found earlier, now twisted and distorted, as if the forest itself had rearranged itself while I slept. My heart pounded, but I followed it, driven by a mixture of dread and compulsion, until I reached the abandoned cabin. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating, and the smell of decay was stronger than before, curling around me like a living thing. Dust motes floated in the dim moonlight, and the sketches on the walls had multiplied, covering every inch of space. Faces stared at me from every direction, some recognizable, some grotesque and alien. I felt their eyes following me, and I realized with a cold certainty that they weren't just drawings anymore. They were alive in some impossible way. In the center of the room, something caught my eye. A small figure crouched on the floor, twisting a photograph in its hands. I approached cautiously, my throat dry. It held a picture of me, smiling on the first day of the trip, and it tore it slowly, deliberately, with fingers too long and thin to be human. I felt bile rise in my throat as the figure looked up, or rather, its gaze found me. And I understood that whatever had been taking the students, whatever had been lurking in the forest, was aware of me now. I stumbled backward, my foot hitting the edge of a broken chair, and the sound echoed through the cabin. The figure raised its head, and the room seemed to shift around me, shadows moving as if alive. The walls pulsed with faint whispers, rising in pitch, circling me, calling me closer. I ran, barreling out of the cabin and into the forest, the branches clawing at my arms, slowing me down. Behind me, I could hear the figure laughing, soft, wet, echoing in the night, and I knew it was following. And then I noticed the footprints in the dirt. They glowed faintly in the moonlight, hundreds of them, all leading toward the forest, circling me, guiding me somewhere I didn't want to go. I ran blindly through the forest, branches slapping my face and catching my clothes as if the trees themselves were trying to hold me back. Every step felt heavier, the ground uneven, twisting beneath my feet like it had a mind of its own. The whispers had grown louder, now a chorus of frantic voices, some familiar, some alien, all calling my name, urging me deeper. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop. I had to escape. Through the dense fog and shadows, I finally saw it, the clearing, the bus. It was parked exactly where we had left it, the engine quiet but humming faintly. Relief surged through me, a momentary lifeline, and I ran faster, desperate to reach it. But as I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The door was open. No one was inside. The seats were empty, my classmates gone, the guide gone. Only the faint hum of the engine remained. I climbed in, slamming the door behind me, fumbling with the keys. The ignition turned, and the bus lurched forward, but the road wasn't the same. It twisted, impossibly long, leading deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so tall that their shadows swallowed the light. My stomach dropped, and I realized with horror that escape was an illusion. The forest had claimed its path, and I was trapped within it. The interior of the bus was strange, too. On every seat there were drawings, hundreds of them, sketches of me, my face frozen in fear, my eyes wide, my mouth open as if I had been screaming for hours. Each one was more distorted than the last, some impossible, some horrifyingly lifelike. My fingers trembled as I touched one, and it felt wet. Not ink, but something else, something warm and sticky. Panic clawed at my chest. I glanced into the rearview mirror, hoping to see something familiar, some sign of safety. But the reflection showed more than the forest behind me. It was filled with faces, pale and hollow-eyed, staring, some smiling, some screaming silently. My classmates. The guide. They were there, pressed against the glass of the bus, their forms twisting and stretching, watching me as I drove. Then, one by one, they vanished, leaving only whispers, soft and mocking, echoing in the cabin. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road ahead. Tall, thin, impossibly pale, with hollow eyes that reflected my own fear. The bus didn't slow. It moved forward, unstoppable. The figure raised a hand, and the shadows around it twisted like smoke, rising into the air and merging with the fog. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed, gone before it left my mouth. The last thing I remember was the headlights cutting through the mist, illuminating hundreds of figures standing silently along the sides of the road, all staring, all watching, all waiting. And then the bus was swallowed, the forest closing around me, the whispers becoming laughter, soft and wet. I don't know if I'll ever leave this place. The trees, the shadows, the faces, they follow me. And sometimes at night I can hear the scratching at the windows, faint at first, but growing, deliberate, like someone or something is trying to get in. I know it won't stop, and I know it will never let me go.